lights in the sky. I ain't sure what it is, but it's making me fly. Spaceships zooming past, colors flashing by. I'm lost in the rhythm, feeling oh so high. UFOs and me, we're floating in the night, feeling airy free. Everything's just right. Alien friends wave, grooving side by side. In the cosmic dance, we just let it ride. Riding through the shadows, under the moon's gleam. Lost in the reggae beat, like a perfect dream. UFOs and me, we're floating in the night, feeling airy free. Everything's just right. Alien friends wave, grooving side by side. In the cosmic dance, we just let it ride. Riding through the shadows, under the moon's gleam. Lost in the reggae beat, like a perfect dream. UFOs and me, we're floating in the night, feeling airy free. Everything's just right.
All right, good morning, good wonderful morning. I realized I was listening to a lot of different things recently. I was listening to, I just finished an audio book on Taoism, and I also was listening to a lot of talk show hosts and some other books, and then I realized I was reading a bunch of fiction books, and a lot of them always have the same theme. It's always about our interaction with each other, our interaction with everybody. In fact, I realize I do this myself. On the show we talk about the interactions of the world, even potential interactions between humans and extraterrestrials, other species everywhere, and even plants and animals, we talk about their interactions. We spoke the other day about dinosaurs and how they interacted with the world. And so today's episode is titled Mingle. And I'm totally stealing the name from Smirkanish. Don't care. He probably doesn't care either, probably loves it. So, whatever. But, it was interesting to me because, they started going back in their data on all the way back to the 70s and earlier, and just slightly earlier, not really much earlier, and about the divide in our country. And I argue that it's not just in our country, it's in the world. So I realized, I'm sitting there and I realized that I've been getting at this the whole time. This is part of what we do, how we interact with each other and how we interact and remember our interactions throughout the world. People always say history repeats itself, but a lot of people say history doesn't really repeat, but it rhymes. And that's a quote. I forget who the quote was from. Whatever. The point is it's true. It doesn't, we don't literally have the same things happen over and over again, but, we could point to history and point to past experiences and say, these line of events are similar to what happened in this time frame, and we continue on. I point to the fact that all the time that what we're going through now reminds me exactly of ancient Rome, except we're not we're not all impoverished people living all on welfare, millions of people living on welfare, and in one city and all these other things, and we don't have the slavery anymore. But it's pretty much the same thing. We're in the same political climate. We're in the same hatred climate for each other. And good morning. And and I see you in chat. I'm on the roll. And we look back and we can see the same similar sorts of circumstances happening. There were times when, let me go with this. The Senate in Rome was all of the nobility and the wealthy and the upper class and everything. It's not entirely like that now, but it's pretty much like that. We have dynastic families in our countries that look at Trump and his family, look at the Kennedys and their family, look at the Bush and their family. Every one of them continues on in the line of politics and governorship, and they continue on. And the same thing is actually being found in our military. In our military, we're having, we're finding it that it's people who sign up because their family signed up and the next person signed up. It's not to diminish a lot of people's, call to service. Of course, that's what it is. But the point is that you see along family lines people joining up for the service, and it continues on and on and on. Even for me, before I had my back pains, my whole plan was to go into the service and everything. And life would be totally different if I did that. Who knows if I'd even be doing this? Probably not. And or I may do it and talk about something different. You never know. But that is one of the key things. And my grandparents served. My parents didn't serve, but my grandparents served. Their parents served. It just continues on along the lines. And so there's this semblance of that. It's in your blood, it's in your DNA, and all these other people point to tons of other people in their families and going up the same thing. And the reason they point this out is because military service across all the military branches, sign up is on a decline. So they point all this out because there's some sort of something going on where people don't want to join up in the military. And it was the same thing back then. And the same thing happened in Rome. So what they ended up doing was conscripting foreigners. And they would go into an area and they would, capture the people. And they would go and they would take their young ones and they would raise them to be soldiers. And there's very famous ones where these guys go back and then they rebel against the empire and raise their own army, now being trained in the military advances of Rome that were totally different from the Gauls and the tribal peoples of elsewhere. And they took this training and they brought it to their own people and they rebelled against them. But the point is they would bring these foreigners in and conscript them and raise them and then make them subservient to the actual Romans. Like if you weren't a Roman citizen, you and in the military, and but you were still in their service like one of these other people, they, you were subservient, you were less than a person, in their eyes, whether legally or not. And there was always a path to citizenship for some of these people, but like, come on, it's like the same thing today. I mean, how many people really get through the path to citizenship? It takes forever. It's all these different, paperwork and fees and whatever. I mean, you think they didn't charge fees then? They charged fees then. And so, they just, but these people would go and they would have the same sort of thoughts that we have today. They feel diminished by the government. They feel abandoned by the people. They feel like they're an alien in their own world. And what ends up happening is people rebel and they don't like what's going on, and they rise up new leaders and new people and new generals and new military. And this happened over and over again. Before the Senate and everything, it was constant fighting and chaos. And then when the Senate was there in Rome, they would always raise up their own battles against each other. Julius Caesar's father was a noble, like, a lord, I guess, in their terms. I forget exactly what they called it in Roman times, but he was one of their noble lords. And, he rebelled against the current leadership. And they had a whole civil war, and he lost. And so his father was on the losing side of the Civil War. Now, of course, because they're made up of all the noble families, his father had to go into, I think his father died in it, but their family was basically in social exile. But because he's a noble family, he's still able to maintain his senator's position in there because he's the representative of their noble line of their family. Back then, their senator was basically an oligarchy, which was the wealthy people coming together and saying, we rule things because we're in control. You see this happening over and over again. And it's not just now. Look at our nation's founding. The whole reason that George Washington and all these other guys were picked is because they were the wealthiest, most social representatives of their territory, of their land, they had the most influence in the neighborhood. George Washington was a former military commander, and George Washington almost wanted, to be the general. He would show up to this when he was called, and then every meeting afterwards he showed up to their meetings in his military uniform. So when they said we need a military commander, everybody said, look, it's George Washington, he's got his uniform on. That's true facts. And so, and he was right there, and they pointed to his things and to his his successes in battles and other things, and then they pointed to his shortcomings. One of his things is he mistakenly sees these French people who are on the side of the French military, and he thinks that they're coming in for an attack, and they claim that they had, a truce offering or whatever. But basically, this incident is just like the last incident that causes the French-Indian War between France and Britain and the Indians. And and it also ruined his hopes for a command position. But what was hilarious is George Washington was never going to get a command position anyway in the British military. A total command position. You know, he may have been a commander of the American version of their forces, but the American forces were lesser in the eyes of the British people. Sounds familiar, right? The British had didn't want to commit all of their troops and couldn't raise a lot of troops at the time, so they would conscript American civilians and their colony people, and they would join forces, make them into a small militia force, and then they would pick a noble area who's a commander, and they would say, or a leader of the town and say, you're the commander and of this small brigade, and we're going to train you and go out, and then you go out and do this stuff for the crown, and we'll give you a command position, and even though you're a captain, a general, whatever, you're still subservient to the generals and of the British crown. But wait, not only that, but your soldiers are also less than the soldiers of the regular common soldiers of the British military. So all of you are less than. Sounds familiar, right? It sounds just exactly like what we just talked about, where the Romans were having trouble with raising their own military because the people didn't want to do anything. They didn't want to work. They had grown complacent in their greed and in their welfare and in their bread and cheese that the government would give them with their games in coliseums and the other various coliseums that existed across the empire. And so the British would go and do the same exact thing. It repeats over and over again. And then the same thing happened in the American Civil War. During the Civil War, we recruited. First of all, during the War of 1812, they did the same thing with the American slaves. They would go and they would say, we'll free you if you come and fight for the crown during this war. And then they did a lot of them. And, and then they did the same thing. We did the same thing during the Civil War, when the slaves in the South, after, they would say, hey, come and fight for us. And then after you fight for us, the Union will free you and you'll be free again and all of that. And, it continues on over and over again. This has happened for centuries and centuries. People fighting against each other, homegrown people, brothers and sisters. We saw during the Civil War, people fought against each other, family to family, household to household. There were multiple accounts of one brother being on the side of the South and one brother being on the side of the North. The point of going through this whole history conversation is to show that society has these ups and downs. And throughout all of it, we are or we aren't mingling with each other. And, pointing to our modern times, they like to say that it's all cell phones and all of this, and I think that that's older people looking at it as being like, well, I'm talking to you and you're looking down as here. So but I think, it's just another piece of technology. If I was obsessed with some sort of other technology, like look at, back in the day, we didn't have phones, but you had cars, and think about how many of your parents go out there and talk to you about their cars that they worked on as a kid or everything, and they were obsessed with it. And then the parents said, oh yeah, he was tinkering with that thing all day long. He loved that thing. He loved that car. He would always, be messing with it all days and nights, and I'd be talking to him and he wouldn't wouldn't even be listening. He'd just be tinkering away and all that, you know. It's a new obsession. But it's about how we use the obsession, you know, how we do the thing that we're doing. You know, because on one hand, you could say, you know, it's great. Social media has connected everybody together. I can talk to cousins who live in other countries and family members who live in other states who I haven't seen or didn't have their phone number before. I mean, you know, it's all these different things, and it's great. It's all interconnectedness. You know, you can see what your neighbor is doing, and but you can't. But then there's the obvious fake side of it. You know, it's all what they want you to see. It's all their perception and how you think about it. You know, they want you to perceive them as being in this glamorous life and doing these wonderful things, and you know, seeing the world. But people fought back then too. People have been getting divorced before cell phones. People have been, you know, doing other clandestine activities, you know, for centuries and centuries. Cell phones aren't the problem. It's how we hate each other is the problem. You know, I bring up Julius Caesar for a very specific reason. You know, a lot of people think today, from our perception of emperors and kings and dictators, everybody thinks that Julius Caesar was a dictator just because he proclaimed himself king for life, dictator for life. But in their terms, it was totally different. You know, he was a dictator because he dictated what was going on. There was no you know, counseling from the Senate. He didn't need that anymore. You know, because why? Because for the last few hundred years, all they did was fight amongst each other. They couldn't get anything done. They never did anything. The Senate never passed any rules. There were tons of stalemates. They just kept, you know, pushing things off further and further along until it broke out to civil war and fighting with each other and multiple different battles. Sounds familiar, right? Sounds like exactly where we are. Little tiny rebellions, demonstrations in the Capitol, in front of the building. This all happened in Rome too. You think it's all new, and so he thought his idea was, well, you know, I'm a noble person and I'm, you know, all about the people because I was one of the people. I grew up from a noble house, lost all our finances, lost all our land, was poor as anybody else, and then grew back up, came back up, earned our land back. You know, I earned our military service, did all these things. I'm a man of the people. And the people loved him. But who didn't love him? The people who wanted to maintain the status quo, the Senate. And so what they do? Conspire against him, call him a dictator, a killer, a maniac, all these things, convince his closest confidant, the one who was going to be his heir before Octavian, Brutus, to rebel against him. And what they do? Killed him. And what happened? Turns out all the people loved him. They loved his ideas. They loved his things. They loved his thing. They loved everything that he said to them. Every promise that he made to them and fulfilled with. And what they do? They killed him, and it spawned a 20-year civil war until his nephew, Octavian, finally killed and solidified power. So, what happened then? We're looking at the same similar sort of thing. Everybody says, oh, he's an evil guy, he does this, he does that, and then guess what? Almost everybody votes for him. So, you know, history may not repeat itself, but it echoes. It rhymes. Every similar sort of thing is happening. And what happens is the elite, the leaders, the people, don't socialize with each other, don't understand the regular people. And the regular people subsequently disconnect all at the same time. This isn't cell phones. This has been happening since before then. This has been happening since, a lot of these people point to these, when I say these people now, I mean these statisticians, these historical people coming up with dates and percentages and data. And, they say it all goes back to the Vietnam War, because our country was in such a divide then that the divide just stuck. What did I say? Stuck. The divide just stuck. And, we've continued on this spiraling path. And, we say, and it's funny because maybe it's a good point, because that entire generation then afterwards, their parents and the next few people have always continued to then say, truck driving ain't great. Working on, with your hands ain't great. What you want to do is you want to go to college. You want to go and do this. You want to get your education and become some sort of businessman, some sort of this. But it's all well and good. It's fantastic to want to have a bettering for your children and for your future and for your descendants' future. It's all well and good, but we in the world need all of these people. One of my favorite sayings is my father used to say, my own sayings is, my father used to say to me, world needs ditch diggers too if I didn't get a good grade, or if I didn't do something and figure it out. You don't go to school, could always dig ditches. Like as if there's only two options, digging ditches or going to college. But that's wrong. If you don't, the world doesn't need just ditch diggers. The world needs accountants, ditch diggers, plumbers, AC mechanics, computer techs. They need people who work in factories, make the textiles, miners, and we don't have the advanced artificial machinery that we need to do this as if we were in the future. And our parents' generation grew up believing that all these things that they saw on television were real. All this future stuff were real. And they would see these things and they would put the date on them. 2004, 2001, the Odyssey, we're in space now, and all these things. And look at Star Trek. All that took place in like 1999 in their eyes. Like as if we were going to be flying to different galaxies in 2002. And you could, and look at, so it's all these different things. And then they would believe these things. They would say, hey, we're going to be there. And why did they believe these things? Because we had real scientists like Wernher von Braun, who invented our rocketry and our space technology and going to all these places. And they would say, and he would go on these videos, and he had a lot of help from Walt Disney and making videos and diagrams and models of the objects that he was talking about. And he would go and explain the physics on how it's possible for us to make an artificial gravity space station and travel through the world. I'm pretty sure all of this is on YouTube. You could probably even go watch it. But you had all these things. And when did he say we could do this? Not in 50, 100, 20, 30, 200 years. He said we could do this in about 10 years with a well-funded space station and a well-funded government. That was in the 60s, in the late 50s. 10 years later, I mean, we weren't there, even close to there yet. So there's this belief of continued on going on in the society, and everybody wants to do better, but nobody wants to do the things that helps you get better. That helps you get there. That helps you get there. We say, oh, space travel is expensive and all of that, which it is, but, is it worth it? Of course it is. And in the beginning of the show, I briefly mentioned about how I've been listening to all these fantasy worlds and these audio books that are all just, fiction, science fiction, nonfiction stories. And all of them are also about how we interact with each other. Almost every writing thing is about how people interact with each other, relationships, even fictional ones. It makes the story good. It makes us relate to it. And one of the books I'm listening to I'm on the third book now of the series, of the trilogy, is The Tier, which is great because it's all about, society, our society and space travel and what happens a few million years from now after our businesses and not the government control space travel. Well, isn't it kind of funny? We're kind of going through that right now. I mean, our government has pretty much failed at space travel. We don't, we don't travel through space. It's a big deal to have just a few people go up into orbit. And, so what ended up happening with that? Well, now we have big businesses, we have big corporations making all these new innovations and new technologies and getting government contracts to build these technologies. In many cases, getting current and former government designs to make these things. And, you think Wernher von Braun was really the first, but what about Nikola Tesla? Nikola Tesla and his whole electric power idea, I'm going to get a sip of water. Hold on one second, chat. His whole power idea for creating nodal points around the planet so he could jump the natural Earth energies that were coming off of the planet and out of the ground from the natural processes of the planet. He didn't just think that he could jump this power between the Earth and all around the Earth, but he thought that he could eventually jump this power between planets and power space travel. It may not have been rocketry that he was thinking about, like Wernher von Braun and others, but he was thinking about space travel and how we could get there and how we could do it. His idea was using electricity to create artificial gravity to then be able to fly through space. And then if he created these nodal points on other planets and used that power, he could basically create like a current that would, just be free flowing all through the cosmos that he believed was already there in the cosmos, and that he just needed a way to channel it, is really what he believed. And he believed all these towers that he could build would be his way of channeling this energy, this power. So so it continues on all throughout society. We look at, but I find the the data interesting on how all of this correlates to mental health. And it reminds me, about always my thoughts on perception and how we perceive the world. For example, my perception is that it is a problem that we're not mingling together. And just because it's been happening all throughout society doesn't mean it's not a problem now. It is definitely a problem now. But what are we going to do about it? My thought process is that, we need to really change our perception on the way of the world and how we view things. Because we view things and we always think we're the first, and our modern society, we're extremely guilty of that because we hear things and we always think it's the first time. It's the first time that it's brand new information. And no, it's brand new to you. You just learned about it. Just because you just learned about it today doesn't mean it's brand new information today. Doesn't mean you're learning it up front right away. So, we have this common misperception that what we're going through is always the first. And think about it as being in your youth. You have all these problems, you're dating a girl or a boy, and you going through it and you're all upset because you're in an argument or some sort of lines, and your parents, you get into a confidence with your parents and you're talking to them, and then they say, yeah, I've been through this before. I understand what you're going through. I get it. And then you're like, you don't get it. And then you talk to your favorite aunt or uncle or your favorite grandparent. And then they say, yeah, I get it. I've been there. We've been through it. I understand. And then you say, you don't get what I'm going through. But they do get what you're going through because they have the same hormones as you, the same chemicals in their body and brain as you, the same chemical reactions as you, are almost the same. We have a generalization of human beings and our society and how we go through it. Things change and people change, but there's currently a less connectedness. We can go because we can filter out the society that we don't like. You used to have to interact with people that you didn't like. In fact, George Washington picked all of his confidants and his cabinet members and all of them because a lot of them thought very differently from the other one. Some of them didn't even like each other. In fact, a lot of them didn't even like each other. But he knew that each of them were smart in their own way so that he could connect with them and connect with each other and have each other connect and bring the world together, because he realized that society is made up of all different people. I don't think like you and you don't think like me. But together, by talking about it, we can work together and do things and create things. In the old Roman days, everything got through because people worked together and did things. Of course, there were slaves and you enslaved people, but they worked together in the upper levels of society and they got together and they did things and they built these great aqueducts and they created these great roads. Same thing happened in Greece. Same thing happened in Egypt. And then everything changes. You get complacent because you like the way things are. You like the status quo. You don't like interacting with people. You don't like having to do all these things. You like coming home and not talking to people and eating dinner at your computer screen and watching somebody on the screen or some favorite show or whatever, or just scrolling through social media and seeing what everybody's like. You don't want to interact with people. But that's the problem. You don't want to do any of that. You don't want to have to go through the world. It's all our perception. We don't want to do all these things that we have to do, but if we don't do these things, our society crumbles. We need the truck drivers. We need the people who work in our local convenience store and in our local 7-Eleven and at Burger King and at McDonald's. Everybody needs to happen. And when you're a young person, you need to do all these things and get a job so you learn how to be self-sufficient and how to take on tasks and multitask and do all these different things. And so when you lose out on that, and then people say, hey, we have this immigration crisis, and but we need the immigrants because our younger people aren't working and don't want to do all these mundane jobs and these mundane tasks. And why not? You'd rather, just sit in a chair in an office for 60 grand a year, or you'd rather work in a truck for 70 grand a year. Who cares if you're driving around and then you got to stop in some truck stop and meet some colorful people and some guy who's standing there with 300 tattoos and whatever, and he's like, yeah, when I'm not driving a truck, I'm riding a bike. And it's like, dude, don't you get tired of driving on the road? And you're like, I like my bike, and the bike is driving, and I built my own custom bike, and you do these things, and you don't, so that's you meet a colorful person like that. And that's a typical person you wouldn't meet because you like to just sit there in the office and sit on the thing, and you find out that, hey, you're a Democrat and he's a Republican, but you find out that, you're both a Christian, you're both Catholics, and you both believe in going to church and doing the same thing. And hey, turns out, he's got 5 years sober and you got 7 years sober, and then you got something in common. Or you both like going to the gym, or you both like, going to rock concerts, and you each got, you get a t-shirt from every concert and you got each one of them framed or something like that. And he's like, hey, me too. I don't have them framed, but I got them all saved up in a nice box. And it's like, hey, awesome. So, you just because you don't agree with someone politically doesn't mean you don't have common ground. But you don't want to go out and have common ground with somebody. You don't want to meet it. And as soon as one thing goes bad or one thing goes wrong, or you don't agree in one circumstance, you disconnect right away from that person. You don't talk to those people anymore. You don't stick around to hear what they have to say. You don't listen to what they're saying, and you just respond immediately because it doesn't agree 100% with what you're saying. Or look at our politics today. If you don't agree, everybody says, people like a lot of Democrats out there go out there and say, for those of you who don't know, I'm an independent. A lot of Democrats go out there and they say, if you don't believe what I believe, you're evil. You're the devil. Well, that's not cool, bro. I'm not evil. I got, friends and family who love me, and I love them, and I care for them. How does that make me evil? I go to work and punch the ticket like you. What does that mean? I just didn't agree with what you were saying, so now I'm the devil? And it's the same thing. And then you say, and then now you get Republicans saying the same thing. They're wackos, they're evil, they're insane. It's all the same words over and over again. It's either the world has become so black and white. You're either good or you're evil. And I don't like that. You're not good or evil. It's all your perception and how you believe things. There's nothing wrong with you believing a different religion than me. There's nothing wrong with you believing in different politics than me. But it's what you do with it. If you just go out there and say, hey, I vote Democrat across the board and I don't care if the guy's a schmuck as long as he's a Democrat, or I vote Republican across the board and I don't care if he's a schmuck as long as he's a Republican or she or whatever. And you're missing the whole point. You're supposed to vote because you believe what that person is saying and following through and on their actions. George Washington in his farewell address talked about our fear of not having political parties, because political parties, he said, would be the end of our country. We didn't have political parties back then. Everybody thinks that political parties are necessary for our country, that this is the way it always was. This isn't the way it always was. There wasn't always set rules on everything. Everything is a learning curve. Our country itself is a learning curve. We don't always do the right thing, but we try to help out. We try to do better, but we're losing our way in doing that. Our volunteer service for the Red Cross is dwindling. Our volunteer services for local food groups and local communities are dwindling. Who volunteers for a soup kitchen anymore? I'm guilty of that. I haven't volunteered for a soup kitchen in years. Maybe I'll change that. And it's all about following through with it, though. Now I got to follow through with it, or do something similar. Give back to a youth group. And so, it's not just enough to go to church on Sunday and stand there and then run out the door. It's not enough to just go, to church on Christmas and then, shake everybody's hand and run out the door. You got to go and interact with everybody. Put your kids in the local youth group, and the Sunday, when I was a kid, they used to, I don't even think they have this anymore. They used to, they would put us in and we would go and sit there in the church, and then they would say, all right, now all the kids are going to go with the local whatever and do whatever. And then our parents would go and finish the church service and then go and have coffee and whatever they did, and then pick us up, and then we go. And then they'd say bye and bye, and then all of a sudden next week I had a new playmate to go because my parents met those people at that after church service that they never would have met otherwise, because they don't go to the gym like my father. The guy doesn't work out, and neither does his wife, and so they don't go, and it's funny because, I'm guilty of this too. I always say, oh, my father goes to the gym and yaps with people and whatever and doesn't really work out as much, but he works out, of course. But, but it's good, actually. It's good because you need to interact with people. You got to meet those people. And then guess what? That person remembers his birthday. Got him a card, gets him a small gift, a gift card to something or whatever, and he does the same. And that's awesome. I love that. That's exactly what it is. My neighbor across the street from my parents' house, still to this day comes by and brings a cake for holidays. My parents do the same to them and whatever. My neighbors, I met the neighbor, one of the neighbors, the other day, because, and why did I meet him? And I see him all the time now, and I interact with him. And why did I meet him? Because he's got his dog, and his dog came running over, and I love animals, and I see his dog, and I say, hey, and whatever, and now I just say, hey, if your dog wants to, run around in the yard, it's okay, and let me know, I'll take him to my parents' house, and he can interact with their dog, and all of that, and whatever, and have a playmate. And now look at this, I got a new buddy, all because you have an animal. Think about, you get your first apartment or your first house, and you're a single guy and a single girl, and you get an animal and you take it to the dog park, and you meet somebody at the dog park. All of a sudden you might marry that person. Maybe you don't. Maybe, they're whatever, but you have the common ground. And even if you don't have the common ground, you have nothing to talk about, you still have your animal to talk about. And even if you don't become best friends, good friends, or even friends in general, the point is you went out there and you interacted with somebody else, and then because of that interaction, you're more confident with interacting with other people. I have no problems with interacting with people, talking to people, going on, talking to myself for all day, whatever. I know that I'm one of the few. I know that I'm one of the few who have very little to no, what is it? Issue talking to people, psychological issue with talking to people, nervousness or whatever. I have none of that. I have no problem. I'll talk to whoever, whenever, all day. And, and it's one of my strong suits. Maybe I get it from a father, maybe it's from my mother, maybe it's in my blood. Who knows? But that's one of the things. But, I remember when I worked as a salesman, and I would make phone calls all the time, and, they'd say, oh, you could, you make, why don't you start off with making 10 calls? Why don't you start off with making 20 calls? Why don't you make a list and call 10 people today? I remember this. This is exactly what they did. They make a list, and then on that list, call 10 of those people today, then go home. We'll see you tomorrow. This was the first day. I remember this. Then tomorrow you're going to come back, and we're going to have a meeting, and then you're going to call the next 10 people and follow up with anybody who didn't answer you the day before. So, and by doing that, any nervousness I had went out the window. I would call, you call the first person and you'd get the jitters. Your hand would shake, your body would shake, you'd start to sweat a little, get a little nervous, you feel your heart pounding in your chest, and you call and goes to voicemail. You were nervous for no reason. Then you call the next person, you're all nervous again. Jimmy answers the phone. Says, hey, how you doing? Jimmy, good. Turns out you end up talking to Jimmy for 10 minutes. Jimmy invites you over for dinner. He says, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. Come over for dinner next week. All of a sudden you're over and you just reconnected with a buddy. And you were all nervous about it. And now it ended up being a good thing. And those 10 calls that I would make ended up turning into 20, 30, 100, 200 calls. I have no problem calling people To this day, I have no problem talking to people. One of my jobs, I talk to people all the time. As soon as I started working there, they're like, "Yeah, you're gonna call people?" I'm like, "Yeah, I have no problem." I worked for a call service one time, and I would call 600 numbers a day. Almost most of them are nothing, but I mean 8 hours. That's blah, 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 dialing numbers all the time. You ain't nervous after that, I'll tell you right now. You call, you got your stick down, you know exactly what you're going to say, you know who you're going to talk to and what you're going to say and how you're going to get there, and all those things. And it makes you less nervous to talk to somebody in person. You have no problem talking to the girl at the convenience store who's kind of cute behind the counter, and you got no problem talking to the local mail carrier. If you're a mail carrier, you got no problem talking to. I remember I would go visit my uncle all the time, and I'd go there on like a Saturday or something, and the local mail carrier would pull up. My uncle had a chip route, and he'd give him a bunch of chips. I don't even remember the guy's name, but he talked to him for like 10 minutes. And I'd be standing there thinking to myself, like, isn't everybody's mail going to be late? And like, but the point is that he knew the guy. He talked to the guy all the time. I'd say, "Oh, you know that guy?" He's like, "Yeah, he's an awesome guy. He goes to rock concerts like me." He's like, "Remember that concert we went to last week?" He's like, "Oh, turns out he went to the one the night before. We missed him at the show by a day." And I was like, "No way. Like, that's hilarious, So it turns out you got more in common with people than you think. Just because you're a businessman and he's the mail carrier doesn't mean that you can't interact with and talk to each other. Doesn't mean that you can't, work out together and come to common ground. You're a local, just because. But our problem is, I think, as a society, is we don't get involved in our local community anymore. The churches don't have, the local youth group like that anymore. I don't know if they have the big youth group, but I remember even when my sister was in that, and I would go to some of it with her. She'd always say, you got to come, it's great. It's just a bunch of people hanging around, not doing anything. I might as well do that at my house. Why do I got to do that at the church? No, I want to go there for a reason. You go there for a reason because you have the same, common ground of faith. Not you're on all just sitting around, what do we do today? What do we do today? You need a little structure. And that's why youth group is failing, because you go there and you're just hanging out. There's no structure. There's nothing to do. There's no getting along. When you would go to in school and you'd have gym class, the rich guy and the rich girl and the poor guy and the poor girl, we're all in the same gym class together, all in the same gym clothes, throwing the ball at each other. And when the rich guy gets hit in the face and the poor guy wins it, everybody cheers for him, and then vice versa, because they won and they did good at it, and you had common ground because you were in a structured, organized environment. We as human beings, we crave structure. We crave everything, and this is why we think we love the status quo, because we get into the common current structure of the world, and we think, hey, this is all there is. This is the world that there is to be. And so, but the world can be more than that. The world doesn't have to be what it is at the current moment. It doesn't have to be, the status quo. It can be better. It could change, and you could change along with it. And that's totally fine. But not all change is good, and not all change is bad. Some of it's in the middle, 50-50. Like, look at our, just like how they point to the phones. You point to the smartphones as saying, you know, this is our way of disconnecting. And it's true that people use it as a means to disconnect, but I believe that those people would be disconnecting anyway. If it wasn't a smartphone, it'd be something else. You know, when we were younger and when I was younger, we didn't have smartphones. But when a new video game came out, I'd play that all day. I'd sit there down in the basement TV with all my games on the big thing, and I just got the new game and I play it for hours. Hours. Think about it. I mean, oh my God, Skyrim? Oh my God, I was so powerful in that game. I would beat the, you know, like the city guard NPCs that you weren't supposed to beat, be able to kill. Like, you know, like they were supposed to be too powerful for you to kill. I killed them. Like I was too powerful. I played that game way too much. Even now, I still play. I love games. I can't hate on it, but you know, we all do. We all play the games way too much. But I didn't lose my interaction with society. I didn't lose my interaction with people. I do this podcast and try to get to the truth of every situation and down to the nitty gritty because I love the world and I love people. I find it so fascinating, our interaction with each other and the history of the world and how we've done these things and how we could do these things and do them better. I find it absolutely fascinating. I love it. I love speaking for hours at a time. I wish I could speak all day, all the time to you guys and just talk about these topics forever. But then, you know, we might get to the conclusion too quick, you know, and I don't want to get to the conclusion too quick. But, you know, it's all about how we perceive how good and bad the smartphones are, because in one hand, it makes it great. I could call anybody. I still have everybody's number. You know, it was hilarious. Like a few years ago, I saw a buddy from high school that I didn't see in a while. And I was like, yo, give me your number. I had to get a new number and a new phone a few years ago, and which is true. And, you know, I lost a lot of contacts, which is true. Literally called me and magically the contact appeared. Suddenly, all my old contacts that I had lost had like magically appeared into my phone. And I was like, what the hell? It was like some divine intervention or something. But I literally had like everybody's number I didn't have before. But with your smartphone, you could call all those people now. You could call all these anybody. You could text them. You could send them a thing. You know, I loved when Apple and Snapchat and everything came out with sharing location with your friends. You know, I think it's fantastic because we could use it in such an awesome way. We don't use it at all. Everybody turns that shit off, goes ghost mode, goes this and that. That's so dumb. That's so dumb. Well, first of all, if you're like a public person and, you know, that's like one thing, you know, okay? But like if you're just talking about you and your group of friends, even 300 of the people that you know, think about it. I know hundreds, if not over 1,000 people that I've met personally just in my lifetime, not including anybody my parents have introduced me to or family members, you know, just, you know, immediate family members have introduced me to, you know, but like I have met, you know, all those people are all in the world. They do different things. They have different opinions. But the point is that you know there are tons of people out there to interact with and go out and interact with in the world. And I forgot what I was saying about why I mentioned how many people over the years, because you know I think it was about interacting. You know, interact. You know, and I realized that when I first started doing this show, and we had episodes like all about Bushido and our interesting conversation about previous wars and everything, and I realized it was all about, I was leading into this topic, and I didn't have a word for it before until I stole it from Smirkanish. But I believe that this is exactly what is wrong with our society. You know, we go, oh, that's what I was saying about the 1,000 people, because you should be sharing your location with all 1,000 of your friends, or at least, you know, the closest 20 of your friends, because what's the big fucking deal? What's the problem? They're supposed to be your friends, and you're trying to hide from them. You don't want them to know what's going on. What the fuck are you doing that you don't want your friends to know about? You know, like, think about it this way. Think about it this way. Everybody doesn't want anybody to know what they're doing, where they are. You want to be hidden away. You want to be isolated. But think about it this way. Change your perception. I say, turn it all on. Turn it on for you and 10 of your closest friends. Start with that. Make a list of your 10 closest friends, just like we had to do for the sales, and or 10 people that you could call, and tell them, listen, I'm starting this experiment, and you're one of my 10 people, and I want to turn on my location and share my location with you. And I want you to do the same for me. And then you look at your phone, right? Now you got 10 people's location shared. And now you can see all where these 10 people are. And you realize, I'm sitting here and I'm like, geez, I'm bored as shit. I ain't doing shit. I watched enough TV. I played enough video games. I checked my sports stats. I checked my stocks. I scrolled through social media 10,000 times. And now I'm bored. Oh, but look, Jimmy is only 4 miles away. Hey, Jimmy, what are you doing? Oh, nothing, man, you know, I'm just chilling. Oh, me too. You want to chill? I was so bored and I saw you were only 5 miles away. Oh, yeah, come over. You know, I was just going to order some food. Perfect. And then he orders food, you come by, and like a gentleman or a lady or a good host or a good friend, you bring over some beer. And then he ordered the food, you brought over the beer, and all of a sudden you have a good night. And all of a sudden you sat there and maybe you didn't do nothing and you just watched TV and chilled, but you didn't do it alone. You mingled. Maybe then you decided, hey, you know, we're having a couple beers. Instead, let's go to let's go to the let's go to the bar. And all of a sudden, you go to the local bar, a bar that you've never been to, and with Jimmy, and you meet your wife, your future wife there, or you meet a girl or a guy, or whatever your case may be, you know, and you never know what'll happen. All because you decided to share your location with your friend instead of isolating in your room. Or it could be, and then what are you so afraid of? You're supposed to be friends with this person, right? You could look at it and say, hey, Jimmy, you're only 5 miles away. You want to chill? Oh, no, I can't. I'm sorry. I'm busy today. Oh, maybe next week or whatever. You know, I'm free next week. Oh, okay, that sounds good. Me too. Then you look back at the phone app. Oh, look, now you have future plans. You look at the phone app. Oh, Jenny is nearby. Call up Jenny. Hey, Jenny, what are you doing? You want to hang out? Yeah, or no, but, you know, maybe later, you know, like, so go out there and try this experiment, because you need to interact with people more. You know, it's not enough that you text your friends all day and then you just go home and chill. It's not enough that you interact with them on a chat or whatever. You need to go out and interact with people all day long. I mean, listen, I would love to, you know, stream 24/7 and play games and whatever, but most of the time I get home at night, and then if I'm lucky I could start playing a game by 10 p.m. Or 9 p.m. if I'm really lucky, at the earliest. I mean, so, by the time I get home, traffic, eat dinner, whatever, I mean, so, but that's because I'm out doing things. I got places to be, people to see, things to do, and it's not a bragging thing. It's a gotta get out in the world thing. We need to get out in the world and interact with people. Do things. Put yourself out of your comfort zone. Go to a place you wouldn't go. Who cares if you gotta go by yourself at some point? That's another thing. People are so afraid to do anything by themselves. Who cares? I've been out by myself and had a blast. Who gives a shit? You end up meeting people and doing things just by being a nice, kind person. You don't need to be a tough guy and have your own attitudes, and all of that. You just need to go out and be a regular human being, and the rest will follow. And but why do we have such this hatredism? Why do we have such this divide? I believe it goes all the way back in time to our tribalism, which tribalism in the old days wasn't a bad thing. It was great. It helped distinguish different hominids from other hominids. Yes, I said that. Over 40,000 years ago, when the last hominids died out and human beings became the last ones, we had to be tribal then, because you had to differentiate us between them, because we were a literal different species. But once there was none left, we should have stopped with the tribalism. But instead, our tribalism became the geological location on your planet. Or the geological, whatever. The location of the planet where you're from, on the planet where you're from. It's silly to think about it. We always say, people are racism and whatever, and it's true that they are, but if you think about it on an actual level, there are no more races. It's the only differences now run skin deep. And that's only a few millimeters. That's about it pretty much. There's a few different, genetic differences, but that's found in other species too on the planet. That's not, has nothing to do with different genetics that would make you a different race or a species. We're all the same species now. And, the last of them died out when we either assimilated or killed off the last of them. I mean, that's what happened. Why are there no Neanderthals or Denisovans or any other ones left? Homo floresiensis, any of them left? Because we either mated with them or killed them off. That's what happened. And even before Homo sapien hominids were around and the other hominids were existing, they did the same thing. They either mated with or killed off the other ones, or a natural disaster killed them off. There's no other option. Those are the only options of what happened. And so why do we not have these hominids anymore and different races anymore? Because there's no different species anymore. There's no Neanderthals, there's no Denisovans, there's no Homo floresiensis, there's no nothing. So it's just Homo sapiens. So we all have that in common. We're all human. That's one thing you have in common with random people you want to meet. But this tribalism factor has persisted. And it's not really still a bad thing. It's a bad thing in the terms of racist context, but tribalism in its base form is not terrible. It's because, you needed to survive. The group of you needed to survive, so you all band together and do what you need to do to survive. And whether that's defending your borders or fighting off the aggressing, warring nation next to you, or you know, or any of the above, really. I mean, whatever it is, it's advantageous for your survival skills. I could also see it as being advantageous for genetic traits to be passed along. For example, we know tribalism has continued and interwoven itself into our religious structure. We know, for example, that Judaism and everything is really all about the tribe. It all started with the tribe and differentiating us from the rest of them. And it wasn't just the one God. It was they had differences in their culture, differences in what they believed they do, and the food they ate, and everything. And we see this today in many different societies, and it's still included in Jewish cultures today. They eat different foods in a special way. They eat, same thing. Muslims do the same thing. Hindus do the same. Many different cultures do the same thing, all because of their religious beliefs that all date back to the tribe, how we survived together as a tribe. And what was interesting in Smerconish's Mingle project and his whole thing is one of the statistics that they pointed out is that Israel is one of the happiest countries. And he said, I wonder why that is. Because they're all united in one common belief, in one common religion, in one common tribe. They all have the same thing. They all have the same common ground. And yes, it's true, they're fighting amongst each other. They're rebelling against Netanyahu and all of that. They're doing all these different things. It's true. But all those people in that country have one common belief, and it's their religion. And it makes them happy. And it's not only that, but the religion itself has requirements for you to interact with each other. You literally have to interact with each other on the Sabbath, in different holidays and different traditions, and then they have social groups. They have women events and male events and all these different things. And we used to have that in other different religions and in Catholicism and in Christianity. We don't really have that anymore. And even if we did, there's nobody who's going to want to go into it. We should. Even if you don't really believe in it, that's okay. And because, you have to continue on, and you just have to continue on with it in the world. But I would think that they're one of the happier countries because they have one common belief. And they believe in something, and they have a reason to interact with each other, to come together and literally and metaphorically break bread with each other. It's a very important thing, because I might not agree entirely with you, and you might not agree entirely with me, but it doesn't mean that I can't hang out with you. It doesn't mean that we can't be friends. Just because you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican, or I'm a Democrat and you're a Republican, or like I said before, I'm actually a registered independent, but politically independent. But the point is just because we are two different things doesn't mean we have to immediately hate each other. And look at, there were so many past presidents, and the whole point of bringing the different branches of government together from our founding fathers was so that we would have the different groups represented. You had the common people represented in the House. You had the 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 Senate being represented by the intelligent people, the specialized trained people, the wealthy lawyers, all of that, the nobility, people who were smart, all of that. Then you had the president who represented the military, right? That's why he's the commander in chief of the military. I mean, this isn't rocket science. And so, they have all these, you have representation of people who don't necessarily agree with each other. There were countless letters from George Washington to Congress, and journal entries venting his frustration about how Congress could get nothing done. So you think it's new that they're getting nothing done today? They were getting nothing done then. And back then, they had political parties. They had the political party of whether you're for unifying or against. And when it was finally decided to unify and rebel against the crown, they didn't just kick out the people who wanted to rebel, who wanted to go with the crown. They said, listen, we'll work it out with you. You don't got to go anywhere. Now, the ones who literally took the side of the crown and rebelled and were traitors and all of that, obviously they were kicked out because they're traitors. Like, hello, we should be doing this. This is all, you should be kicking out the traitors in the wartime, because those people cause harm to your community, to your people, to their people. Also because it's wrong, but whatever. So the whole point is like I said before, is history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, is totally true. We continue to go on the same thing and on the same path, and the path may curve a little bit, but it's the same thing. We keep wanting to divide each other. George Washington talked about not wanting to have political parties. And we didn't have political parties for our first 2 elections. And then after we did. And now everybody acts like it's the norm and it's the way things should be. It's the way things are. But I say we should get rid of our political parties. It is ruining our divide. It is ruining our country. It is ruining our people. Nobody wants to react with each other. And statisticians have proven that the far left and the far right, who control our politics, are actually really only 14% of the equation. Like 42%, I think it was 42% of people actually started to identify as independents, like me. That's great. That's awesome. Everybody should register as an independent. And why is it a problem? They don't let you open in primaries. They don't let you independents vote in primaries anymore. They don't let you do it. So right then and there, you're isolating 42% of the population. They don't let us vote in primaries. That's rigging the system. You're losing out on all these people so that you could get your candidate into power by only using the 14% margin. That's rigging the system. That's basically putting money in everybody's pockets, and you're controlling everything. And the Democrats aren't so great. Look back at the whole party. First of all, the Democrats were originally the party of the slaves in the South, the slavers in the South. Then the Democrats were the ones who controlled New York and controlled the whole political party, and basically they would just put people that they wanted, regardless of candidacy, regardless of actually being good, and regardless of even if they did anything. They would vote they would just put these people in power, put them up for a vote, and say, hey, this is why they're great. And it worked out great for a long time. They kept winning and not winning, and all along it kept dividing our country. And the Democrats today just tried to do the same thing. You know, what was it? Remember on New Year's? Who was it? Whitney Cummings, isn't that her name? She said the Democrats were too busy holding a dead body up. 100% accurate that was. Totally 100% accurate. I laughed so hard because it was so freaking true. And literally because they're still trying to do it. You know, we just had that new reporting come out all about how we had all that reporting coming out about how the Democrats knew and didn't say shit. And then a bunch of them were saying, well, we didn't really see Biden that much, so we didn't really know except for a few minor interactions. Yeah, you didn't see him that much because they were hiding him away because he was a babbling old geezer. I mean, you remember when they said that they're treating his job as a 9-to-5 in the beginning? The president's job is anything but a 9-to-5. It is a 24/7, 365 job. You know, one of the things I find also, as they pointed out too, is Republicans and Democrats don't interact at all, even at the highest levels, except for when they have to in the Senate or on the thing. Because, you know, they used to have groups of people come together, and, you know, you used to have the families living together in D.C. They don't do that anymore. And I found this so fascinating. You know, you used to have, you know, all these people, the Democrats and the Republicans, either come together or have separate things, and they're you know, it was only men at the time mostly, and the men would go, and then the wives would go and interact with each other. So you had, even though you had one person be a Democrat or one person be a Republican, you had common ground because your wives were friends. And you would have, you know, you'd go to their house for a barbecue because, you know, they'd invite you over because you're friend's wife. And then you'd get there and realize you had more common ground than you thought you did. You know, just because you were, you know, you didn't really like the guy because he was on the other side of the aisle than you. And then you go there for a barbecue and it turns out that you guys are really great buddies because you agree on everything except for like 2 or 3 things. And those 2 or 3 things really are what separates each other from being a Democrat or a Republican. And now that's all being blurred. Now you're either, they want you to believe it's either, see, this is the perception angle. They want you to believe it's either a Democrat or Republican. They want you to believe it's either one side or the other. But it's not. It's not one side or the other. If you look at a statistics curve, these guys are on the slim margins, on the very far side of the curve. They're 14%, they're at the very end. And yet they're controlling all our politics. The wackos who are on the fringe of society are now controlling our politics. Like AOC and all these other guys. You know, and you know, everybody's controlling our politics, and they're all whacked out of their mind. These people are crazy, and we're voting them into office based on a slim majority. They're winning their office positions based on a slim majority. And this is wrong. And this is why we shouldn't have electoral colleges, why we shouldn't have all these different voting systems. It should just be cast your ballot, and if 30,000 vote for Trump and 30,001 vote for Harris or vice versa, that's the people who win. That's how one person makes a difference in our society. You know, even in Congress, we're not supposed to have the 2/3 majority. It was never like that. You're supposed to have the 50-50 majority so that one person can make a difference. That was the goal of our founding fathers. They wanted our country to have one person be able to make a difference. They wanted one person to be able to change the world. You know, it wasn't about a kingdom. It wasn't about a monarchy. It was about from anybody from the lowest rung of society to the most richest man and has something to say and can change the world and everybody else's point of view. It's supposed to be, if there are 100 people in the Senate, a vote is supposed to be able to be decided by 51. So, you know, it's not supposed to be 2/3. It's not supposed to be 2/3 of the House. It's supposed to be 50-50 split. It's supposed to be, you know, that we can be on that slim majority of a line. But you're not supposed to be able to. This is what they were afraid of. This is what the founding fathers were afraid of with political parties, is that we would is that the fringe would become the loudest voices and would drown out the everybody else, because these fringe people, they look and they say, you're evil versus our, because you don't agree with what we have to say. And they just spew that over and over again. Democrats and Republicans alike do the same thing. They just spew it over and over again, to the point where a regular person like me just goes, shut up, I'm just going to not watch this, and I'm not going to get invested in politics, and I'm just going to, you know, continue on with watching a regular TV show. So you don't get invested in politics, and then consequently, you don't get invested in your local politics either. And this is a huge problem, because our local politics are actually what dictates your day-to-day life. Everybody loves to watch the presidency and watch the president's politics, but the president is just the federal government as a whole, and really not really your day-to-day 100% life. You know, they affect a majority of it, and they really mostly control funding and policy making, but they don't affect your day-to-day life like your local town does. Your local town imposes taxes, and you know, and your governorship and your local and your state, and you know, and your local town is the one who processes criminals and prosecutes people, and yet people don't get involved in that. You don't watch the local news. You don't read the local newspaper digitally or whatever. You don't know about your local youth group, or I don't even know about that, but what I'm saying is you don't know about your local groups and things that you could do to join with each other, and how you can interact with each other, and things that you could do, you know, events that you could join. You don't know about these things. And then you drive past it and you see, oh, what's that going on? And you're like, oh, gee, maybe I can go next year or whatever. And then next year comes and you go, oh, geez, I remember I forgot about that last year. Oh, well, I'm busy doing nothing now. I'm just going to go home. And then you don't go and you don't enjoy it, and then you don't interact with anybody, and then you isolate. And, you know, I'm guilty of this too, because, you know, I work a lot, and then I have things to do, and I make a schedule, and I want to get things done, and I want to get things done besides my 9-to-5 job and whatever. But, you know, and it's difficult. It's difficult to make the time. It's difficult to follow the schedule, but I find that when I actually do these things, and I do go about the day, you know, I feel very rewarded and strong at the end of the day, and smart. And like, you know, even if you just get up and, you know, go to the store, and then you cook dinner, and you clean the house, and you chatted in somebody's chat instead of just watching their stream, and you did, you know, you vacuumed, you did some laundry, you accomplished a bunch of tasks, you got things done, you'll feel a little accomplished at the end of the day. You went out and you interacted with people. You got gas in your car. You went to the mechanic. You got the oil changed. And instead of sitting there with your earbud or staring at your phone, you had a conversation with the mechanic. You had a conversation with the guy who works at the front counter at the thing. And it turns out you end up, you have more in common than you realize. And the guy says, hey, why don't you come over? I'm having a barbecue next week. And you say, hey, that sounds awesome. And then you do all these things, and then you go there and you find out, you have real buddies. And then you go there and you find out somebody else is there that you already knew. And then you say, hey, small world, it's Jimmy. Remember Jimmy from our earlier example? All of a sudden, Jimmy knows the guy, and you say, hey, how do you know this guy? Oh, well, he's my mechanic, but I actually knew him since high school. And you say, oh, gee, that's hilarious. And, you find out that, he only lived one town over, and he lived around the block from Jimmy. And when Jimmy wasn't hanging out with you growing up, he was hanging out with this guy, and you find out, oh, small world, all these things that you never would have knew if you didn't take your earbud out, or at least keep one earbud in, one earbud and one earbud out. I do it all the time. I love having my thing. In fact, I have the Alexa glasses that I use. I love those. They're awesome, and they have the volume raises and lowers depending on if I'm having a conversation or if I have outgoing noise, or background noise. It'll raise the music because it knows that I'm trying to listen to it and don't want to hear the background noise. But if I'm speaking, it'll lower it or even pause it in total because it knows that I'm talking, which is awesome because I could be at work and just be having it on, and then somebody's got to talk to me, and I go, hey, here it is. I love doing that. I've had them for years now. I had the first gen, and then now I have the second gen, I think, and I love those. They're great, and it's perfect because you could live throughout the world and go throughout the world, and you could listen to your music and just turn your noise canceling off, and you could hear the whole world around you and still listen to your music, still isolate, and then still interact with everybody. You don't have to go out, but I say it's very rewarding to go out and make a committed, noble effort to actually go out and interact with people, not divide, not separate everybody between good and evil immediately in your life. Because not everybody's good and evil. Of course, there are people who do evil and you should not be interacting with them. And there are people who do good and you should be interacting with them. But not everybody's so black and white. People do things for a variety of reasons. But you gotta, of course, life is a learning curve. It's a judgment curve. You need to judge who you are for, you need to judge who you interact with, but it doesn't mean that that person is evil and you need to cut them off as soon as one thing bad happens or whatever. It just, people learn too. Just because I maybe did something bad in the past doesn't mean that you can't learn from it, or you did something bad from the past doesn't mean I can't expect you to learn from it. Of course I do. But what makes you evil is continuing to do those bad things and continuing to do them knowing that it's bad and you still like it. You still do it. Those are people who are evil and you shouldn't interact with. That's the definition of not good and evil. But just because, something bad happens once doesn't mean that the person's evil forever. Just because they did something bad once, or good once doesn't mean that they're good forever. It's all about the levels and the medium in between. Because not everybody's good and not everybody's evil. But we as a society do not interact, and I find it so ironic that I'm doing this as a podcast and on social media and everything, because it's so funny because that's exactly what I'm doing, is not in person interacting, but you could pause this and interact with later. You could pause it as a podcast and read it when you're not interacting with people. And same thing with other shows and all of that. That's the beauty about the pause button. We don't have to. We could live our life and still see everything we want to see, do everything we want to do. And but we as a society need to interact more. We need to mingle more. We need to get out there and involve ourselves more. And I'm guilty of this too. I'm probably going to take my own words for it and change my own mind and my own attitude, but we don't do these things as a society. People aren't invested in community groups and in their local faith group or whatever. People don't do that anymore, even if you don't necessarily believe in all of it. The point is the interacting with people. The point is the socializing with people, the mingling with people, the getting to know people. And you realize that the world is not such a terrible place. We go out there and we realize even my parents are guilty of saying this too. And their parents too, and their parents too, I'm sure. Is the world is evil. The world is a bad place. People are evil, but the world really isn't that terrible. The world really is nice, actually, I think. I think it's beautiful to live out in this world. I think it's wonderful that all these, that there's this whole world and this beautiful landscape that we live in and that people interact with. But it's all ruining. Not interacting with people is completely ruining our society, because I think the main issue here is that there's a lot of hurt people who are conditioned to hurt people to validate their pain. Yeah, that's another thing. Is people just want is that's their perception though. That ties into perception. Is people want you to feel bad for them, and then they want to continue feeling terrible. Those people want to continue feeling terrible. Why? Why do you want to be terrible and you want everybody to feel bad for you? And I don't want you to feel bad for me if I'm going through something terrible. I literally don't want you to feel bad for me. I want you to say, hey, that sucks. I'm sorry that's happening to you. But, can you do something about it? Or, hey, I got an idea. Here's what you could do about it. That would be freaking awesome, bro. I would love if you could do that for me. Because, I don't want to feel bad. I don't feel bad all the time. I'm actually genuinely and most of the time a pretty happy person. Whether I'm hanging out with a lot of people or doing a whole bunch of nothing, I'm generally a happy person. And, but, these people they just want to bring you down with them, and they don't care. But I'm telling you, Dead Click, this is the fringe people of society. These are the 14% that they're talking about, who have now all of a sudden become the loudest voices, not only in politics, but in our society. These are the people, and they're the ones who say, if you don't agree with us, you're evil. If you don't agree with everything that's just come out of my mouth, you're evil. And that's the beauty of things. Is I always say, I've been saying from the beginning of this show is if I'm wrong about something I'm saying, that's totally fine. Tell me. And I'll listen to you and then either do the research or come back or do it immediately on the spot, or say, hey, you know what, you're right, or I forgot that. Because I can't be held accountable to think for every single thing on the planet and every single person, even though y'all seem to sit there and say to me, hey, how come you didn't think of that? How come you didn't do this? You didn't get it 100% right. And it's like, well, of course not. I'm only human. What do you think, I have an S on my chest? So it's, and it's like, dude, so of course I didn't believe 100% what you believe. First of all, we know that nobody does, because psychologically, you don't have the same chemicals in your brain exactly. You literally didn't live the same life as them. That's two factors. And then you don't have the same literal eye perception of everything. And I mean, like, if I'm in the same room, for example, take the twin paradox. The twins, you know you're born of the same mother, you have pretty much the same DNA, you have the same household, the same thing, but you still don't 100% think alike. That's because you don't have the same literal perception from your eyes. It's like if I take a camera and have a recording here and a recording over there, and both of them are facing me, but these people see the side profile and you people see the front profile, and you're seeing the same thing, but the guy in the side profile might be able to see me scratch my ass while the guy in the front profile can't. So, you're getting a little thing, and the guy in the side profile might say, oh, gee, he scratched his ass, he's a dirty fuck. And the guy in the front profile might say, wow, I really like his haircut today. It looks really good, and at the same exact second. As I scratched my ass, somebody might say, oh, my haircut looks great. So, the world is all perception, but we have to realize that not everybody perceives the world as us. But just because you're suffering, boo fucking who? You think I don't suffer? I've literally had crippling neck and back pain for a decade. My entire youth, I've had all these problems. Literally my youth, my 20s, I've literally had all these problems. You think that that's not a part of why things happen in life? Why like, you think that that's not a part of, like, why my problems are and why my life has taken a different trajectory? It's 100% taken a different trajectory because of that. And like I told you before, I was supposed to go into the military. I had all these plans, all these things. This was the whole plan. I would have made it my entire career. You're recovering from those things too, dead dick? I feel you, man. It's terrible. But that would have been my entire life. I have no doubt that I probably would have never done any of this. No streaming, probably barely played a video game, nothing, and it blows my mind how different the world has changed just from my own perception and perspective, but when I was younger growing up, nobody said it's me versus you, I remember having a conversation where, one of my friends, a guy friend, finally told me that he was gay. And I, had little suspicions then, but who really cares? But I was like, oh, okay. Glad you told me. And they were like, dude, I thought you were gonna, persecute me or something. I'm like, what am I gonna, fucking hang you on a cross or something and throw holy water at you? Like what do you mean? Why would I hate you because of that? But from their perspective, they thought that, whatever. And it's like, dude, you don't realize how a person is going to react to something until you put yourself out there. If you don't tell me something, I'm not going to know it 100%. I'm just going to have my suspicions about it. I'm going to have my thoughts about it and how I think about it and how I think of the world, but that's it. And if all I have is how I think about the world and how I perceive it, it's me versus you. There's no us, there's no we. And it is ruining our society. And you know what's hilarious is if you watched High Potential stream the other day, is we had this whole conversation. We had a heated argument. It was great, honestly. I wish I was recording it. And it was awesome argument because we were talking about the JFK files and how they've been released. And for decades, everybody's been saying, oh, if you don't believe it was Lee Harvey Oswald and only Lee Harvey Oswald, then you're a conspiracy theorist and you're a wacko and we don't want to talk to you because you're on the fringe. And guess what? All the documents came out and now we know that there was more than one shooter. In fact, there were three. Three. Go read it. There were 3 shooters. Okay? So go get it. And not only that, but for decades, people have been saying it's statistically impossible for him to get more than one shot off with a bolt-action rifle in that span of time. And it is. And I've shot a bunch of bolt-action rifles, so I know for a fact it is fucking hard. Especially because you got to pick up the bullet, put it in, cock it in, aim again, and then do it. You know, like, what are you, like, you know, a robot, like, loading it in like microseconds? Like, that's obviously not happening. You know, and we know today that were there foreign people involved? Yeah, everybody just thought it might have been Russia and the Soviets, but it was a different communist. It was the Cubans. So everybody who was a wacko and on the fringe was wrong and was crazy and not to be trusted and not to be talked to is now almost 100% right. And you look at the same thing is going to become true with ancient alien theorists. It's not that, like, you know, they came here. Remember, the common misperception is that the aliens built the pyramids. No, the aliens didn't build the pyramids. They helped the common local people raise their society. And one of the things that came with their society was engineering and building knowledge. And they gave them those knowledge, and then they helped grow their society by having the knowledge. And that was the knowledge they needed to be able to, for the human beings themselves to build the pyramids. Whether through social labor, slave labor, a combination of all the above, makes no difference. It was the human beings who did it, not the aliens. So the world is not what you perceive, you know, just like the world is just, it's totally different than you perceive. Who cares if we find out that extraterrestrials exist? It doesn't mean that God doesn't exist also. Because if you think that God made us, then who made the aliens? God did too. Think about it that way. You know, if God made us, he probably made the aliens too. Or at least made the physical processes in the universe that allowed for the chemicals to be born to make those aliens and to make human beings. You know, whether direct or indirect. You know, and so just because extraterrestrials exist also doesn't mean that there isn't one single omnipotent God that we should all believe in also. And in fact, you know, one of my favorite things to point out is that, you know, when I was growing up and before I even knew about Chariots of the Gods, before I even heard of Eric von Daniken and Ancient Alien Theory, I thought the same way, you know, because I would read these books. And we had a religious teacher where we would sit and read the Bible and read stories and passages. And we would sit there, and in church we'd hear that God is all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving, all-omnipotent, creates everything, creates the world, blah, blah, blah. And then you read the passages, and It's not what it talks about at all. It talks about different warring kingdoms and deities and people fighting against God and space travel and all these things. It reads like the most awesome combination of middle-aged kingdoms and futuristic space travel like you've ever heard. Fuck Star Wars. It was way better than that. And you like literally like and I remember saying this to my teacher. I said, it sounds like I'm reading what I read about in history class in Middle Eastern kingdoms. I mean, not Middle Eastern, well, yeah, Middle Eastern and Middle Age kingdoms in Europe, and how they fought against each other and warred with each other. And she was the first one to tell me to read the Book of Enoch. And that started my whole process into religion and magic and divination. But if I didn't have that forced mingling opportunity, if I didn't have to mingle, I don't go to church today. I believe in fact, everybody knows that if I were to pick a religion today, I'm actually a Zen Buddhist, a Japanese Zen Buddhist specifically. But even then, that's just what I would pick if I read it. I have. First of all, if you read the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, you got to remember those Emerald Tablets, the original ones were lost. So the ones that were written on today are actually a psychic translation from a guy in like the 60s who claims to have been a psychic and write these down, which is the same thing as what Mormons believe. So it's not really that crazy to believe. So anyway, but the point is that started my whole belief. And even then I got into martial arts and I got into studying and wars, and I invested myself in life, and through martial arts I interacted with multiple people and multiple friends and made new enemies and new friends and met old friends and old enemies, people I still see to this day, people I don't even talk to anymore, people I only speak to or see on social media or whatever the case may be. Same thing with college and on beyond. I mean, that's the great thing about college is you have it's a continued forced interaction between people. High school was great. I used to say, people always say, oh, I hated school. I used to tell them I loved going to school because I get to hang out with everybody every day. I swear to God, I used to say that. And that was my favorite part about it, was I got to hang out with everybody every day. You couldn't tell me that you didn't want to hang out today and because you were feeling lazy and watching TV, or it was raining out and you didn't want to ride your bike over to my house, or it was, you had something to do with your family that day. No, you had to be there, and consequently, you had to interact with me, and we therefore had to become friends or enemies, whatever the case may be. So, and one of the studies that they were pointing out is that we're even losing the school bus. I mean, that to me is actually, and then they said that there's some communities that are paying parents to actually drive their kids to school because it's cheaper than paying for the bus service. That is crazy. Do you know how many girls I dated from the school bus? Like, how many friends I made and enemies from the school bus? I still talk to the neighbor kids who lived in the neighborhood from my parents, all the time. I still see them all the time. I still see these people. These people I've known for so many years. Some of them I only interact with on social media or whatever because they moved away or blah, 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 blah. But, the point is these are the interactions that you need. And this is why our world and our youth is crumbling. Look at our percentage population. We don't want to have babies anymore. We're only at a 1.2% growth rate of our population, while we look at countries like Africa and other things where they have 5.6%. And you say, okay, maybe these lesser developed countries have less birth control or something like that, or preventative care or something like that. Okay, that's fine. But even though, but among the people who can have kids, who can afford it, who can be wealthy, are still going down. They don't want to have kids. They don't want to do things. And even when you have a kid, you have one kid or two kids. Gone are the days of more than two kids, pretty much. Most people stop there, mostly because of a financial reason. I agree. Lord knows I know it's struggling, and I know it's struggling. We're all struggling out here, me too. But, folks, the point is we don't interact with each other enough. And I've been saying this for years, and I think it's time I put it out there. Somebody said to just us, about me and Tinker, how could we be such good friends? We think differently, or we do differently. Yeah, that's how people become friends. Just because you think differently or whatever doesn't mean you're an evil person, or doesn't mean I have to hate you. It's just, we need to get out there and mingle. In fact, the whole point of mingling with like-minded people, not like-minded people, is because they don't think like you. Otherwise, if I wanted to mingle with people who thought like me, I could just clone myself and then just interact with myself. And then you say, hey, somebody calls me and says, no, I'm busy. Who are you with? Oh, me, myself, and I. Like, oh my God. And, excuse me, I need the water. And, and it's like, it's like being able to respect and expand someone's perspective is literally the most fundamental idea of friendship, beyond like interest. Absolutely. And that's why I say it's not bad that we have cell phones. It's not bad that you can go on a dating app and filter what you like. And, this is the final part. We're going over the 2 hours today. Recently, I heard about a study, and then I looked into this, about, it was done years ago, and I knew about this, but I totally forgot about it. They did a study where they had a bunch of men wear t-shirts, and it was a sweaty t-shirt experiment. And, they did it, and then they asked the women to smell it and rate it on sexiness and attractiveness and all of that. A man's natural scent, no cologne and whatever, right? And, they found that measuring those people's, personality types and whatever, and what they believed and how they acted and whatever, they were more attracted to opposite people. And the reason they were more attracted to them is they thought, hey, maybe there's something with that. Maybe there's something in that, and they started studying this in nature and in animals and in birds and whatever, and they realized that now in the modern age, decades later, they realized that it has to do with not only expanding out of the tribalism in a social aspect, but in a genetic aspect. When all these animals in nature are smelling the other animal's pheromones, what they're really doing is actually smelling the immune system of the other animal of the species and realizing that it's opposite of theirs. And that's what attracts them. So you realize that nature makes it beneficial for two opposite people to interact, because the immune systems need to combine together and make a wholly better person. This is advantageous to advancing a society, a people, a culture, everything, genetically and everything, to fully expand the world. I keep looking around because there's a spider over there. I'm trying to kill it. I'm going to kill it. We look out, and turns out that it might be that human beings are smelling this too. And they said, well, this is actually, but the reason why, and then they had a person, they said the reason why this is beneficial is because in nature societies, they don't really marry for 60, 70 years. They don't get married for all these years. It's really all about mating and having kids. And, they go to mate and have kids with them, and so they want these opposite genes so that they have strong, healthy children. That was fascinating to me, because if human beings are doing the same thing, then it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that lust and love are two different things. Lust is nature and about mating, and love is about our decisions that we make according to our own feelings and how we interact with it. And so the difference between nature and lust and love and choice is our perception, is how we perceive the world, and our genes, and how our genes interact with each other. If aliens really did create us, it was absolutely necessary for us to develop as a society to create other types of hominids on this planet and then let them kill each other off or mate with each other. Because it grew our genes genetically and made us more advantageous, made us more special, made us better, made us stronger, made us faster, made us smarter. So we continue that trend today. And our marriage thing is because, we get married and married for life nowadays, but when those rules came out, married was, life was only the next 10 to 20 years. And then that was the end of it because, in ancient Rome, your average lifespan was only 25. Most people, if they lived into 40s, you were really wealthy and could eat good food and good meat, but most of that was the Senate and the wealthy people and all of that. So, it was very different. And, if you lived until even in the Middle Ages, when you lived to 30 and people say, oh, they got married at 15 back then or 13. Yeah, it's because you were only going to live to 30. So, you had to be able to live long enough to raise your kid and have as many kids as you can so that hopefully at least one of them will survive. Because it's a harsh world out there, so the world is a funny place, but it's necessary genetically, physically, spiritually, and emotionally advantageous. More people today have depression problems and diseases and things that are like that are psychologically linked, and it's all can be related back to our society and how we perceive our perception, how we perceive our society and other people, because the world is meant to be interacted with. People are meant to be lived with and loved and cared for and even hated. But it doesn't mean that hate and love are all that there is. There's a middle ground, and the middle ground starts with mingling with each other and putting yourself out there. Who cares if you got to go out by yourself and have dinner by yourself? They still have local diners. I love diners, and they have booths, and most of the time they have some cute girl working there. So if you're single and you got nothing to do and you're a guy and you want to go meet some cute girl, put yourself out there and don't be a freaking weirdo. So, but it is so advantageous for us as a society. We need to be having more kids. We need to be interacting with each other. We need to be living with and loving and living among each other. The world is a beautiful place, and it is time we stopped hating and fearing and all these terror and dividing, when we could really be unifying. And if we weren't so divided, we could have achieved Wernher von Braun's goal of space travel. If we weren't so divided, we could have achieved Nikola Tesla's free power. We could have, and today I could be talking to you from the planet whatever, and you would still hear me here on Earth. The world needs to mingle. Thanks everybody for joining me today. I love you all so much. Appreciate you for chatting also. That was fantastic. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, whatever. Join on our website. Make sure you check out for upcoming updates. Make sure you follow on X for up to the minute updates. And make sure you mingle. Much love, y'all. Appreciate everybody come today. We'll see you Thursday for games. And if you missed any part of the episode today, make sure you join in on all podcasting platforms. Go on our website, click the link to whichever platform you use, and have a wonderful, wonderful week.